Preston founded this association. He used quality material to encourage the first buildings of churches and then the fellowship of those same churches. He planted churches throughout Nova Scotia to bring the gospel to people who were not readily accepted into the established white churches. He wanted to be sure that there was a black church in every black community.
Well.
And in his day, the communities poured into the churches. In most cases, it was local talent that carved the pulpits and sewed the altar dressings. It was the people in those communities that gave their time, their talent, and their treasure. They were actively engaged in the spread of the gospel. And it was the entire community. In fact, if you were not in church, you looked like the odd one. And I can imagine Richard Preston writing to us through what Paul is saying here, saying that we must be as careful as the church in Corinth as we build on what he has established.
Yeah.
But it seems like being careful has caused us to really be neglectful. There has almost been an analysis paralysis when it comes to the AUBA. We are stuck. We're stuck. We're stuck and we're having a difficult time moving forward, becoming unstuck. Perhaps that is because we, like the fictional Dr. Sam Beckett, have found ourselves in a place that is unfamiliar and we are not quite sure why we are here.
Say that.
We are not as geographically removed from each other as our ancestors were. We are not as constrained by transportation. Most people have cars in their families or access to public transportation and can easily get from one end of Nova Scotia to the other. And even though we still periodically brush up against racism in our society, we are not as limited by our race, at least not legally. Most of us can worship in any church, black or white. But when you examine these statistics, we have lost churches in the AUBA and in our wider convention body. It has been noted that we have not planted churches as our predecessors did. We have lost an AUBA presence in some of our historically black communities. I suggest to you today that in being careful, we have really been neglectful. So the question arises, why are we here? What are we to do? What is our mission for this time? I submit to you that our challenge in this century is not the quantity of churches, but rather the quality of churches. In this day and age, we have more educated ministers with more extensive training than our forefathers had. But our leadership is sorely inadequate. And the word coming across some pulpits is not an informed word. The word coming across some of our pulpits is not the truth of God, but a the church. The church is not the sustaining force in the community it once was. We spend more time fighting amongst ourselves inside the church than we do fighting the spiritual enemy on the outside. The enemy is no longer afraid of the church as in former days, and has come in some churches and just set up residence. Instead of the gospel being proclaimed, the gospel is defamed. Rather than spreading the good news, we are spreading the hood news. Ephesians 5:14 says, "Wake up, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." The AUBA needs to wake up. It is a sleeping giant. Now it is time for the sleeper to arise. A sleeping giant, for those who do not know, is a force so tremendous that you do not want to disturb it, because if you do, you know that if you wake it up, you are in trouble. The enemy has managed to stifle us for a time. I don't know when it happened, but at some point when we were not looking, someone hung a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door. And no one came knocking. But now it is time for the giant to wake up. Pastor Fisher told us this morning, sometimes it's got to get real bad before you get desperate enough to spend time in prayer and fasting and seeking the face of God. Sometimes it's got to get real bad before you recognize that you need the Lord. Sometimes God's got to tear up stuff so you can come around and understand that you're not out here all by yourself. That He is the one who demands glory. Our kids are in trouble in the streets. Our communities are war zones. Our homes are falling apart and are no longer safe havens even for our own children. People who fought long and hard to be free and to enjoy the civil liberties due every citizen are enslaved today, as surely as they were tethered by chains. We are victims of a media culture, and our children are the collateral damage of our neglect. We are, as one author put it, amusing ourselves to death. Education has lost its value among our young, along with morals and standards. AUBA, it is time for the giant